One of the largest imperial adventures in American history was the brutal invasion of Iraq in 2003. Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein had refused to allow Western oil companies to exploit Iraq's massive oil fields. He refused to buy American weaponry or allow American military bases in Iraq. Moreover, he spent Iraqi oil wealth improving Iraq rather than investing in Western banks and investment funds. After the 9/11 terror attacks in 2001, American President George W. Bush exploited this tragedy to justify an invasion of Iraq. He frequently suggested that Iraq had supported these attacks, but no proof existed. He claimed that Iraq illegally possessed weapons of mass destruction. Everyone who closely followed events knew this was false, because in 2003, as U.S. forces prepared to invade Iraq, President Bush demanded that Saddam Hussein prevent UN inspectors, quote, free and unfettered access, end quote, to search Iraq for WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. Hussein surprised everyone by agreeing, and UN inspectors were allowed to roam Iraq at will and check all the locations that Colin Powell had recently told the UN Assembly were actively producing illegal weapons. After several weeks, the dozens of UN inspector teams had found nothing, and the dirty, rusty conditions of the suspect sites showed nothing had been made there for years. The Bush administration insisted they had other proof of WMDs in Iraq. Chief UN Inspector Hans Blix publicly stated that, quote, 700 inspections were conducted, and in no case did we find weapons of mass destruction, end quote. He told the press that the United States would send him a clue. He would have UN teams inspect any site the next day. Iraq even proposed that U.S. military officers join the UN inspectors. As a result, President Bush had perfect intelligence that Iraq had no WMDs. This confirmed what General Hussein Kamel, Iraq's weapons chief who defected from Iraq in 1995, told UN inspectors and the CIA that Iraq had destroyed its entire stockpile of chemical and biological weapons and banned missiles.
This man is a man who said he was going to get rid of weapons of mass destruction. And for 11 long years, he has not fulfilled his promise.
A third Bush justification for invading Iraq was that Saddam Hussein was a madman who gassed his own people. This was false, yet is still accepted as fact 2 decades later.
A lot of people understand he's gassed his own people. A lot of people understand he is unstable. So we got a lot of support. A lot of people understand the danger.
A short history lesson is required to understand what happened. After a revolution expelled Iran's longtime American puppet dictator in 1978, the United States sought to reestablish control. It imposed sanctions and secretly encouraged Saddam Hussein to attack neighboring Iran in 1980 to seize more oil fields and thus weaken its new democratic government. After some initial success, the effort bogged down into World War I-style trench warfare for 8 years. Iran had 3 times the population of Iraq, and the United States feared it would prevail in a long war of attrition. If Iran won and took control of Iraq's oil fields, it would become a world power. Since Iraq had started this war, the United States officially remained neutral, yet secretly supplied Iraq with satellite and signals intelligence. American Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld is shown here visiting Saddam Hussein in 1983. The United States provided Iraq with hundreds of millions of dollars in credits to buy American grain that was used to buy other American products, like ammunition, equipment, and supplies to create chemical munitions. The United States sold Iraq 155 millimeter howitzer shells that contained a white phosphorus, WP warhead that explodes to spread an intensely burning chemical. This munition is considered legal unless used against civilian targets. The United States used WP often during the Vietnam War, officially to mark targets for aircraft or create a smokescreen. However, smoke rounds are available for these purposes, whereas WP rounds start fires and inflict severe burns upon contact, especially when set to airburst. The United States later used these munitions in Iraq, as shown in this video of American WP rounds airbursting over the city of Fallujah in 2004. They were later used on the large Iraqi city of Mosul to burn out defenders, as this video shows. Iraq purchased huge numbers of 155 millimeter WP howitzer shells because it is simple to remove the WP chemical from the hollow warhead and place a deadly chemical munition. The United States knew this occurred, but said nothing because it feared Iraq might lose its war with Iran. Some of the fighting occurred in areas inhabited by Kurds, who were frequent victims. In a 1988 battle near the Kurdish city of Halabja, poison gas killed an estimated 5,000 Kurds. This made world news as both sides blamed each other. This tragedy was used to demonize Saddam Hussein years later. President Bush often stated Hussein was a danger to the world because he gassed his own people. This remains a justification for the war on Iraq, even though this claim was shot down before the invasion of Iraq had begun. Stephen C. Pelletiere speaks Arabic, was a CIA Middle East analyst, and became a professor at the U.S. Army War College. He wrote a book published in 1992 about the Iran-Iraq War, and penned a courageous article that appeared in the New York Times on January 31, 2003, that debunked President Bush's claim that Saddam Hussein gassed his own people. This article is linked below, but is behind a paywall. This is a short yet important document, so I will post and read it aloud. It was no surprise that President Bush, lacking smoking gun evidence of Iraq's weapons programs, used his State of the Union address to re-emphasize the moral case for an invasion. Quote, "The dictator who is assembling the world's most dangerous weapons has already used them on whole villages, leaving thousands of his own citizens dead, blind, or disfigured." End quote. The accusation that Iraq has used chemical weapons against its citizens is a familiar part of the debate. The piece of hard evidence most frequently brought up concerns the gassing of Iraqi Kurds at the town of Halabja in March 1988, near the end of the 8-year Iran-Iraq War. President Bush himself has cited Iraq's gassing his own people, specifically at Halabja, as a reason to topple Saddam Hussein. But the truth is, all we know for certain is that Kurds were bombarded with poison gas that day at Halabja. We cannot say with any certainty that Iraqi chemical weapons killed the Kurds. This is not the only distortion in the Halabja story. I am in a position to know because, as the Central Intelligence Agency's senior political analyst on Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War, and as a professor at the Army War College from 1988 to 2000, I was privy to much of the classified material that flowed through Washington having to do with the Persian Gulf. In addition, I headed a 1991 Army investigation into how the Iraqis would fight a war against the United States. The classified version of the report went into great detail on the Halabja affair. There is much about the gassing of Halabja that we undoubtedly know. It came in the course of a battle between the Iraqis and Iranians. Iraq used chemical weapons to try to kill Iranians who had seized the town, which is in northern Iraq, not far from the Iranian border. The Kurdish civilians who died had the misfortune to be caught up in that exchange, but they were not Iraq's main target. And the story gets murkier. Immediately after the battle, the United States Defense Intelligence Agency investigated and produced a classified report, which it circulated within the intelligence community on a need-to-know basis. That study asserted that it was Iranian gas that killed the Kurds, not Iraqi gas. The agency did find that each side used gas against each other in the battle around Halabja. The condition of the dead Kurd bodies, however, indicated they had been killed with a blood agent, that is, a cyanide-based gas, which Iran was known to use. The Iraqis, who are thought to have used mustard gas in the battle, are not known to have possessed blood agents at the time. These facts have long been in the public domain, but extraordinarily, as often as the Halabja affair is cited, they are rarely mentioned. A much-discussed article in The New Yorker last March did not make reference to the Defense Intelligence Agency report or consider that Iranian gas might have killed the Kurds. On the rare occasions the report is brought up, there is usually speculation, with no proof, that it was skewed out of American political favoritism toward Iraq in its war against Iran. I'm not trying to rehabilitate the character of Saddam Hussein. He has much to answer for in the area of human rights abuses. But accusing him of gassing his own people at Halabja as an act of genocide is not correct, because as far as information we have goes, all of the cases where gas was used involved battles. These were tragedies of war. There may be justifications for invading Iraq, but Halabja is not one of them. That was the first half of this article, and I will stop here because the remainder discusses other issues. Perhaps President Bush was unaware of these facts before this article appeared, but must have known about it after it appeared. Yet he kept telling this lie.
There should be no doubt in anybody's mind this man is thumbing his nose at the world, that he has gassed his own people, that he is trouble in his neighborhood, that he desires weapons of mass destruction. I will use all the latest intelligence to make informed decisions about how best to keep the world at peace, how best to defend freedom for the long run. We'll continue to consult. Listen, it's a healthy debate for people to express their opinion. People should be allowed to express their opinion. But Americans need to know I'll be making up my mind based upon the latest intelligence.
The New York Times openly supported war, and it is unclear why it allowed Pelletiere's facts to appear a few weeks before the invasion of Iraq began, although it labeled his expert information as an opinion. No one published an article disputing Pelletiere's revelations, yet his facts were ignored by the American political class and the corporate media. President Bush's claim made no sense because Iraq has a dozen minority groups whom Saddam Hussein had always treated fairly. If he insanely decided to kill 5,000 of the 5 million Kurds in Iraq, he could order them killed with machine guns. He wouldn't waste scarce chemical munitions on them in a time of war. It remains important to debunk this lie that evil Saddam gassed his own people, because this is still used to justify the unprovoked American invasion of Iraq in 2003 that led to a bloody occupation. While most Bush apologists admit that there was no Iraqi link to the 9/11 attacks and that no weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq, they state the invasion was needed because Saddam Hussein was a terrible person who gassed his own people. He was no saint, but never gassed his own people, and was no more brutal than the other Arab dictators the United States calls allies. The American war on Iraq was sold to the public with lies that American leaders and generals knew were false.
About 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld, and and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They've just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail."